Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Talking Stuff, brought to you by our friends at Buyers Auto and, of course, Lettermen Row. We're here in Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Where have we been the last couple days?
We've been on the road.
On the road.
Lettermen Road. Ooh. This is Austin Ward. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. Spencer Holbrook is manning the fort in Columbus as Austin and I have gone around a little bit of the eastern.
It's a spring break recruiting road swing.
Yeah, exactly. All that. First stop was Virginia. We saw Travion Henderson, as you've seen on Bermanology on Lettermen Row. Today, we were in North Carolina talking to Evan Pryor and then stopped out here at Robert Glenn High School to see Javari Ritzy. And I'm going to start with Ritzy because he's a player that I don't think a lot of people know anything about. And maybe that's my fault. I don't know, because maybe I haven't talked about him.
I don't think that you're alone in not giving this guy enough attention.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you see a kid, and that's the first time I've seen Javari Ritzy in person just a few moments ago. You'll see that on Lettermen Row in the coming days. But that kid looks like a defensive end.
Yeah, and this is crazy because of what I'm about to say. I know it's crazy.
It's crazy.
But
are you crazy?
He's about to have, he's about to go run the track meet. He's going to do the 4x2, the 4x4. He said he could run an open 200. Okay. I remember there were these recruiting stories about Chase Young and what he was doing running track at his size. Javari Ritzy, I haven't watched him play football, obviously. I met him today. Sure. We talked to him for 10 minutes. He's running track. Physically, the way he carries himself, the way he comported himself, there were a lot of things that made me think there were Chase Young vibes. And I'm not saying that he's a generational defensive end by any stretch of the imagination, but you and I were talking with him, and he was talking about the way Larry Johnson recruits him and what he wants to do. He could still go anywhere. It's not like this guy is a lock to go to Ohio State.
Right, he's not even close to a decision.
But he fits really neatly into that mold of what Ohio State is looking for. And I'm not just talking about the physical attributes. You told him, especially when you play for Larry Johnson, you have to be a little bit different to thrive in that room. The challenges that he throws at you. To play at Ohio State at any position takes a lot of self-confidence. And that kid, I would say, he certainly has the mental capacity to do it and the physical skills. If you're going to run track out here at 6'5", 260, whatever he actually is right now, I mean, it's the real deal.
Well, I mean, we've talked in the past about Zach Harrison, who was running a 22.2 or something in the 200 when he was at Orange High School in Powell, Ohio. And what you see out of these kids, and I talk about it all the time on Talking Stuff and on Lettermen Row, is that Ohio State is recruiting a different type of person than they used to. And Javari Ritzy, again, we do not talk about him much, and so I don't want to stand here and gas him up too much, but we haven't really broken down his recruitment. This is a kid who's very high on Ohio State's recruiting board, and when you talk to him for 5 minutes, you understand why. That sort of, there's a different vibe about the kids that they're recruiting and the way that these kids present themselves and the way that they talk, the way that they kind of just take over a situation, and there's no self-doubt with that sort of kid. And if you're playing in a program like Ohio State, you have to be full of that, not arrogance, but at least the confidence to know that you belong in that conversation.
It certainly wasn't arrarrogance with this kid. I mean, he was as humble as they come, and he talked about one of the keys was, his father. I think it was the preacher at the church that he goes to, and he connected with Larry Johnson over their faith, and that he thought that was unique in the way everyone else is approaching him. I don't mean to dive into the recruiting stuff is your aspect, but when you're talking about the different level kids, and I only get to meet a select few, maybe 1 or 2% when you're dealing with the entirety of the class. Certainly the ones that sign, I know the difference with them, and this is a chance to meet somebody who's still in high school, and he's still got his senior year ahead of him. Here to play for this program, and he already carries himself as if he was a college football player.
There's a lot of times when I think people assume that when I talk about that stuff that it's just fluff or that it's just blowing smoke up people's butts for no reason, and it's really not. I mean, you can just see the difference. Glenn High School also has a very talented 4-star linebacker named Jahvaree Dilworth. His coach told us that he ran a 4.35. He's a 2021 linebacker, very interested in Georgia and North Carolina.
I'm not sure if that was a laser timed 4.35.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. Even if you lose 0.2 seconds, if you're a 4.55 as a high school linebacker, that's pretty special. Ohio State's not offered Dilworth, but it's just something to keep an eye on. before we were here, as I mentioned, we were down in Cornelius at the home of Evan Pryor. Talked to his coach for a while down there. What was your biggest takeaway, I guess, Austin, when you get a chance to talk to a coach who is very comfortable talking recruiting?
Yeah.
Like, that's a guy that has been through the ringer. He's a former Penn State coach. Like, he knows what's going on.
He lives in that world, and Ari Wasserman wrote about his whiteboard a couple weeks ago on The Athletic, and the volume of coaches that come through there. He's very proud of that, and he definitely wants to publicize and give them most opportunities for all of his players that he can. Well, there's a big reason that there are so many schools in Ohio State. I was trying to count before we left.
I saw it on there 3 times.
Yeah, how many times they'd been through the door, and if Ryan Day was there, if Tony Alford or Kevin Wilson, and you could just kind of tell, like, those first names rolled off his tongue. Like, Ohio State is there for a reason, and Evan Pryor, you can see why programs want him so badly. And from my perspective, looking at the team and the future of the makeup of the roster, you have to have one of these guys that you've talked about, the top 5.
Sure.
You have to have at least one. I think Evan Pryor, as he narrows down this list and is close to a decision, he looks like a great fit. I can't even really separate it from Travion Henderson, who we saw in Virginia earlier. Tony Alford has made connections with both of these guys. Yeah. And the part, like, when you've talked about running back recruiting at Ohio State and what happened in 2020 with that class and the way it fell apart, it's always strange to me because Tony Alford has such a way with, the guys that he gets into the program, and he's a very, I wrote about the J.K. Dobbins recruitment last year. He's very skilled at getting to know these guys and building relationships, and it's just weird to me that now you can't separate both of those guys are close with Alford, but that Ohio State is now in this position where they have one scholarship running back in spring ball. It doesn't make any sense to me, but it's also why it's so important, why we were, on this spring break road trip to talk to these running backs and get to know them, because they could be potential answers for the Buckeyes, and they really, really need it.
You talk about Alford. He called, or he texted Evan Pryor when we were there with him today, and then Evan called him, and it's just sort of an everyday thing. It's so.
Well, Travion Henderson, when we walked in, he had one piece of mail that was waiting for him in his coach's office. Right. It was from Ohio State.
So Alford, he got knocked so badly in the last year by people on the internet where everyone knows everything, and about how he was
on the internet.
Yeah, but I don't know everything. I need the message.
Sorry to interrupt you twice.
I need the message boards to tell me what's actually happening. But even after losing the commitment from Bijan Robinson was still calling Tony Alford in November and December for advice on life. I mean, so it's not like he's not, as you said, not making a real connection with these kids, because he really is. Mm-hmm. He still is in conversation with Zach Evans, and not about playing football at Ohio State. Ohio State does not want him to play football at Ohio State, but he's trying to mentor him as a person, just to to make sure the kid makes smart decisions. And you can sort of see it, and I mentioned it in Dotting the I's on Tuesday night. When Travion Henderson, when we turned the conversation to Alford, his mood instantly changed. It was a palpable shift in his comfort. Like, you could see it kind of lit him up a little bit. Evan Pryor is the same way. Donovan Edwards has said over and over that his best relationship on the recruiting trail is with Tony Alford. So this idea that Tony Alford is dropping the ball in recruiting, it infuriates me in a way, because if you talk to these kids and their coaches, it's absolutely not the case. It's just sometimes kids don't go where their best relationship is.
And that's part of recruiting. I mean, you wrote this week, and some of this, my take on it is largely formed by you, because you're as good as it comes to the recruiting stuff. But you look at the battles that go on between Ohio State, Clemson, for example, or Alabama.
Jordan Hancock. Well, I don't mean to interrupt you, but Jordan Hancock, who committed to Clemson on Wednesday, his best relationship has been with Ohio State for months, and Ohio State was the undoubted leader in his recruitment until he visited Clemson last week.
And I think that's sometimes a reflection of when I'm looking at it from my removed perspective from that, why I think position coaches leaving or coordinators leaving for other jobs, why it rarely, from my perspective, doesn't tip the scales that often in recruitment, because these kids are looking at so many other things, and you don't know always what it's going to be, because Tony Alford clearly has put in the work to get to know these kids. Sometimes it makes it so easy for them that they don't even need to see campus or need to be pitched on the academics or need a special jersey, because that's the way it was with J.K. Dobbins, that he had that instant bond and that was the only coach that he wanted to play for. Now, maybe I'm contradicting myself, where if Tony Alford had left, maybe J.K. Dobbins would have gone somewhere else. But, the end result here is that 2020, in my opinion, was such a wild aberration for running back recruiting, because you're just not going to have a program that has the prestige and competitive excellence that Ohio State does, winning the Big Ten 3 straight years, going to the college football playoff, on and on, the college football championship trophy in the Big's lobby and all that, and has had the tradition at running back. Clearly, you can go back to Archie, but even just from the kids, like these younger kids, they know Zeke, J.K. Dobbins, Carlos Hyde, Mike Weber. These are the guys that they've watched and they know. And Zeke especially, well, Tony Alford coached him. So they have all these things that work in their favor. And I think, I don't have a crystal ball for any of these recruits. I don't know, you don't even like to do that. But I have to think that 2 out of these top 5 or 10 are going to go to Ohio State because of the opportunity that's available to them in terms of playing time. If Tony Alford is still there, and Ryan Day's offense and how beneficial it's been.
Right.
It's 2021 is not going to be the same as 2020.
Evan Pryor mentioned it, and he'd mentioned it to me in the past as well. He basically said, it's crazy to think that people could see that situation and walk out of there without taking it. And that's why, I still think Evan Pryor, his coach, said on Wednesday that he didn't know where he was going, that he was uncertain, that if you asked him 2 weeks ago, the decision may have been different than it is today. I'm not backing down on that. He's going to end up at Ohio State. I feel pretty confident in saying, and just the way the tea leaves shape out, it just makes too much sense. And I know that there's this push here in North Carolina, and that's what we talked about with Javari Ritzie as well. Mm-hmm. There's a push to create something at North Carolina. Kids don't care about that. They care about going to the place that's going to promote them and develop them and get them to the NFL and have a chance to win championships. And it's just like in basketball, kids are going to go to Kansas. If they're in Ohio and they have a chance to go to Ohio State or Kansas, they're going to go to Kansas.
Yeah, I think because we've heard so much about UNC and the Tar Heels while we've been down here in the last couple of days, and they're involved with these players. I don't think that it's real, this like momentum and building a fence around the state of North Carolina or any of that stuff, because it's much easier for them to talk about that in March and April. And I know that these kids love to say that they're never going to decommit, and that's not for them.
Sure.
I'm not saying that's going to happen in North Carolina either, but if they go out there and struggle to win games again in the ACC, or they just got to a bowl and they had an opportunity to nearly beat Clemson and didn't do it.
Right.
They still want to win, and maybe there is some home state pride for some guys that the quarterback Drake May, is that his name? Maybe he wants to be part of that down the road. But
of course, it also helps that his father played here at North Carolina.
But that's what I mean.
His brother played basketball. There's family ties. That's one that there is a pull to stay home. But for other guys, especially, you're talking here to Javari Ritzie and talking about Tyquan Lewis and these other defensive linemen from North Carolina that have gone to just Ohio State, not even to mention Clemson and South Carolina and Georgia and all these other spots, running backs, Zamir White, Todd Gurley, just recent names that have left North Carolina to go play at Georgia. Like, these kids, they like North Carolina, but even Evan Pryor's coach said, he sees as many Buckeye fans as he does North Carolina fans. And
my point too is, like, North Carolina hasn't suddenly catapulted into the national consciousness or going to, win the ACC. So even if they have some momentum right now and they have kids that are considering North Carolina more than they might have in the past, how is that going to translate to actually when the games start being played and Ohio State is leading the Big Ten, winning the Big Ten, going to the college football playoff, Georgia is in contention to win the SEC and leading the SEC East, and Clemson is down the road a couple hours and dominating the ACC. I don't see how that translates once the actual results got going. I know it's a chicken or egg argument, but North Carolina, to me, you're always going to put the emphasis on basketball. It's never going to be football, and that's not going to translate for long, in my opinion.
We don't need to talk much about North Carolina, I think, after this trip.
Just because we've been here.
We do need to talk about Clemson.
Sure.
Because there is a Clemson problem with Ohio State college football recruiting. As I mentioned, Jordan Hancock, who Ohio State was on very early, Clemson was always the dream school, and most of the time that means absolutely nothing, okay? He hadn't visited Clemson in over a year. He went there last weekend. I have seen a text message that says, I am 100% not going to Clemson, from Jordan Hancock to an unnamed source. while he was on campus at Clemson. And then I've read so far today that middle of that visit, something changed. So what it is, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. The point is Clemson is really damn good at what they're doing. They're doing a fantastic job getting kids on campus, number one, but making sure they don't leave without being committed, number two. I don't know exactly why that's working so much. Maybe it's just that type of, the kids who want that sort of feeling are just buying into it. I know Ohio State is going to continue to recruit Jordan Hancock. They're going to continue to try and get him to take his official visit in June. I would imagine that the end of March visit that he was going to take is off. In a lot of cases, I think, not to overreact or whatever, but I think a lot of the end of March, early April visits that have been scheduled are probably going to be canceled anyway, as the coronavirus fears around the country change people's travel plans. So maybe it wouldn't have mattered if he committed to Clemson or not. And I said on Talking Stuff on Sunday night when Spencer and I were talking, I thought that if Jordan Hancock returned to Ohio State, he would commit to the Buckeyes. The Buckeyes were the absolute leader in his recruitment. But things change. And again, kudos to Clemson. They do an incredible job. I wrote about it on Tuesday morning. They have to get through those few days after the visit for Ohio State. If the Buckeyes can get those top guys to get through that visit without committing, I think that in most cases they can get back to the point where they are the team to beat. But they didn't get through those few days.
It's funny when you write about the battles with them and how this rivalry is extending beyond the college football playoff, the national championship, and going into recruiting and this jockeying to be the number one or number two class in the country. Like, for me, I have a hard time buying into it as a really significant deal. Those two programs in Alabama and Georgia and Oklahoma are always going to be in the mix for the top 100, top 200 players. Right. And there are enough of them to go around.
Yeah, they're still going to get really good players.
And so it hurts when teams invest, coaches invest and build those relationships. Like if Tony Alford comes up short with those guys that we mentioned earlier and they go to Texas or stay home and go to Florida State or wherever, that hurts them. And you can see in that position that actually did impact this spring's roster. Right. But if you're talking about going to get a defensive lineman or going to get a defensive back, Ohio State's not going to have a problem with that.
No.
And Clemson can't take every cornerback in the country. And if you get number 8 or number 12 at the position, you're going to be just fine. Yeah. And then from there it becomes development. So I don't mean to minimize any of that.
No, but I think some of it just becomes psychological.
Yeah, that's fair.
Where you start to wonder, what in the heck?
Yeah.
For this kid that we knew we were in the front for, he hadn't been to Clemson in a year. They didn't offer him until a month ago. Ohio State, when that happens, you just kind of shrug your shoulders. Oh, how do we stop that?
Yeah.
And you just can't. But again, there also is this component of a kid who is an hour and a half away from home at Clemson as opposed to 8.5 hours away from home at Ohio State. You can go to Clemson and win a national championship every single year. You can win a conference championship every single year because nobody in the ACC, including North Carolina, is going to make a push to beat them.
Poor North Carolina's taking a beating on the show.
It's just not going to happen. And you have a perfect storm at Clemson right now where they can do whatever they want because nobody can stop them.
But
Florida State's the only option, the only choice, the only chance to stop Clemson in the ACC is Mike Norvell and Florida State.
But I look around the Big Ten, and as deep and competitive as the Big Ten is, you could make the same case about the Buckeyes. Sure. If there is somebody in the Midwest, or even look what happened with the kids that we went to see in California when it was C.J. Stroud and Court Williams, and yes, they missed on Clark Phillips. These guys, another few that I got to get to know. But if Ohio State really truly wants somebody, they're going to get them if they're against their regional rivals in almost every case.
Absolutely. And that's the difference. Again, when you're talking geographical advantage to Clemson, they definitely have that. Sure. Ohio State has the advantage of being in a city as opposed to being rural South Carolina. But most kids don't care once they get on campus because the reality is you're spending 3 to 4 years in one building anyway.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that Clemson is in the middle of nowhere. When you're on Clemson's campus, it's as good as anybody in the country.
In my experiences with you on the road, I've tried to come up with this theory because I really only consider it 3. You talk about Georgia all the time, and I did include Oklahoma in there, but I really think there are 3 powerhouse programs. And these kids, when I've talked to them, it's Alabama has this reputation, which is a little bit unearned, I think, when you compare it to Ohio State, but they're the pro factory, and Nick Saban is the NFL guy. And Clemson has a little bit more of a, that small town religious feel. And then your third option is you're looking at guys like Harry Miller or Court Williams that I talked about last year, where Ohio State has now kind of carved out this niche as the academic program out of those three. And again, you could apply them and you could move them around if you want to the others, but that's sort of the way it is. And so if these top tier guys, you don't know which one they truly prize over the others, but a five-star kid is almost every circumstance going to be talking about these three programs. Ohio State's not hurting for them. They're getting more than their share, and it's not suffering. So,
yeah, I mean, people are going to ask about where do the Buckeyes turn as defensive back, and again, like I said, they're going to continue to recruit Jordan Hancock, but it's pretty much a wasted effort. Nobody ever decommits from Clemson. So, we've talked about Ja'Kalen Johnson, who was also at Clemson last weekend. I don't think he's committing anywhere. His recruitment doesn't have that same feel. I think he still ends up at Ohio State. And then we talked about Jansen Dunn. And I've talked over and over about Devontae Smith down at Cincinnati LaSalle, who's Ohio's best cornerback. And I think he's going to end up in the class in some capacity anyway. So
he's from Cincinnati?
He's from Cincinnati.
And Kerry Combs is back?
Kerry Combs is from Cincinnati,
yeah,
also, coincidentally.
I would make a crystal ball prediction right now.
Well, they haven't offered him, so they need to figure out if they're going to do that.
I'm still putting it in.
But the loss of a guy like Jordan Hancock certainly allows for that to happen. So anyway, we're going to get on the road because it's time to get back to the great state of Ohio. That's
you sure you don't want more of my recruiting thoughts?
Hey, I'm all for talking stuff about recruiting. Thanks again, Byers Auto. If you're looking for an auto, go to Byers Auto for helping us out and sponsoring this trip. And we'll get back to Ohio and talk more stuff with you guys later. That's Austin Ward. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. Thanks for watching. We will talk to you on Sunday.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe below to get the latest videos from Lettermen Row.
We got Letterman Live, we've got the practice report, we got rapid reaction. Hey, and we got Buckeye IQ with Zach Bourne.
For sure. We got recruiting breakdowns with Berm. We got whatever you need. Ohio State football and Ohio State athletics, we've got you covered here at Lettermen Row.